Welcome to the California Housing and Community Development Training Series. Today's session is titled Procurement Methods. This procurement training will focus on procurement principles, procurement methods, subrecipient selection, and the documentation requirements. The purpose of procurement is to ensure that costs incurred for the CDBG CV program are of good value and are a good use of taxpayer funds. A cost is reasonable if it does not exceed that which would be incurred by a prudent person under the circumstances at the time the decision was made to incur the cost. The level of analysis to determine the cost reasonableness varies based on the procurement method. The procurement actions must provide for fair and open competition and result in price competitiveness. Fair and open competition must be provided for regardless of the procurement method and no matter how small the purchase amount. Prices must be fair, competitive, and reflective of the market price without surge pricing or other premiums that may otherwise increase the cost. To ensure fair and open competition in procurement actions, the following are strictly prohibited: organizational conflicts of interest, specifying only a brand name, any arbitrary action in the procurement process, the use of statutorily or administratively imposed geographical preferences, placing unreasonable requirements on firms to qualify, requiring unnecessary experience and excessive bonding, non-competitive pricing practices, and non-competitive contracts to consultants on retainer. The following workflow depicts the key milestones in a procurement process. The complexity of the requirements to be met generally increases as the dollar amount of the procured goods or services increases. From left to right, procurement actions begin with developing a scope of work or description and an internal cost estimate for the goods and services to be purchased. Next, the method of procurement must be appropriately selected. Then, the bid solicitation should be drafted. Bids should be solicited from an adequate number of vendors or qualified sources. Then, bids must be evaluated. The contract to purchase goods and services should be negotiated. And finally, the contract or purchase order should be administered to receive the procured goods or services. There are 4 allowable methods of procurement. First, micro purchases. Second, small purchases. Third, sealed bids. And fourth, competitive proposals. Micro purchases may only be used for the procurement of items that do not exceed $10,000 in the aggregate. Small purchases may only be used for the procurement of goods and services that do not exceed $250,000 in the aggregate. Sealed bids or competitive proposals must be used for the procurement of goods and services that exceed $250,000 in the aggregate. Micro purchases and small purchases are also referred to as informal procurement actions. This is because they are not advertised. Instead, the grantee may select known suppliers or vendors. Micro purchases are generally used for the purchase of supplies and materials, and this method may be used for the procurement of items that do not exceed $10,000 in the aggregate. Grantees must distribute micro purchases equitably among qualified suppliers or vendors. Contracts and purchase orders may be awarded without soliciting competitive proposals, so long as the price is determined to be reasonable based on research, experience, purchase history, or other information that is documented accordingly. Small purchases are generally used for the purchase of goods and services that exceed the micro purchase threshold, but do not exceed the simplified acquisition threshold of $250,000 in the aggregate. Bids are solicited through oral or written quotes. Grantees must document an adequate number of quotes are received, and records must also contain the rates or quotes received along with the name, address, phone number, and website of each bidder. Sealed bids and competitive proposals are also referred to as formal procurement actions. This is because they are advertised to promote free and open competition. The sealed bids method is the preferred method for the procurement of construction contracts, provided that a complete, realistic, and adequate description of the work to be performed is included in the bid document. And this requires a published notice inviting bids that includes what is being purchased, terms and conditions the vendors must meet, where and when sealed bids will be opened. The grantees must award a firm, fixed-price contract to the lowest-priced responsible vendor that is capable of compliance with the bid specifications, capable of performing the work, and has adequate administrative capacity. At least 2 responsive responsible bids must be received in response to the solicitation, or the contract must be rebid. If only 1 bid is received, grantees must document the efforts to remove barriers to access and participation. Competitive proposals are generally used for the procurement of consultants and professional service firms, such as architects and engineering firms. Proposal types include request for proposal, or RFP, request for qualifications, or RFQ, or a request for information, or RFI. Like sealed bids, competitive proposals publish the solicitation, and at least 2 responsive bids must be received in response to the solicitation. Unlike sealed bids, however, the contract can be awarded to the most responsive firm whose proposal is most advantageous, which means other factors besides price can be considered to determine the most advantageous offer. Again, if only 1 bid is received, grantees must document the efforts to remove barriers to access and participation. Non-competitive proposals, also referred to as sole source contracts, are discouraged, rare, and require HCD pre-authorization. They may only be used when it's not feasible for a small purchase, sealed bid, or competitive proposal. And one of the following conditions must apply. The item is only available from a single source, or an emergency exists that will not permit a delay resulting from the competitive bidding process. Depending on the services to be provided, selecting a subrecipient instead of procuring a contractor may also be an option. A subrecipient is a public or private nonprofit agency, authority, or organization receiving CDBG-CV funds from the grantee or another subrecipient to carry out eligible activities. For example, if the county wishes to provide a portion of its CDBG-CV funds to a city or a nonprofit organization to distribute food to low and moderate income people, the county may enter into a subrecipient agreement with a city or nonprofit organization to carry out that activity. However, if the county wishes instead to have a private for-profit business distribute food to low and moderate income people, the private for-profit business will need to be procured for because the for-profit entity does not meet the CDBG definition of a subrecipient. Subrecipient selection is not a procurement action covered by 2 CFR Part 200, Sections 318 through 327. Subrecipients can be selected directly through a Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA, or other competitive or non-competitive solicitations, such as the method of distribution model. Unlike procured contractors or vendors that result in a contract for goods or services, grantees must pass through the CDBG funding and the uniform administrative requirements via a subrecipient agreement. Documenting decisions at each stage of a procurement is incredibly important to demonstrate compliance with requirements. Documentation should include the type of procurement, advertisements, independent cost estimate, type of contract, scoring, including adherence to solicitation, the basis for contractor selection or rejection, the price or cost analysis, in the basis of award and contract amount. So now, let's test your knowledge. Match each procurement method in the left column with one of the desired goods or services in the right column. The answers are provided on the next slide. Here are the answers. How did you do? The purchase of office supplies can be procured using the micro-purchase method so long as the supplies do not exceed $10,000 in the aggregate. The purchase of multiple computers and software are more likely to require the small purchase method since they are likely to exceed the micro-purchase threshold of $10,000 in the aggregate, but not exceed the simplified acquisition threshold of $250,000 in the aggregate. A construction contractor may be procured using the small purchase method so long as the contract amount does not exceed $250,000. However, please note that all construction contracts that exceed $250,000 must be procured using the sealed bid method. A consultant contract should be procured using the competitive proposal method, most often through a request for proposals. Emergency services may be eligible for a non-competitive procurement, but again, grantees should ensure they meet the stringent requirements and are pre-authorized by HCD. The selection and designation of a nonprofit service provider as a subrecipient is appropriate to allow the nonprofit to assist the grantee with providing CDBG-CV eligible services, such as a public service. Procurement standards, as well as subrecipient and contractor determinations, are located in the Uniform Administrative Requirements at 2 CFR Part 200, Subpart D, which are also hyperlinked here. Thank you for attending this California Housing and Community Development training session on procurement methods. If you have any further questions, please contact your grant administrator.